Yesterday was Super Tuesday in the US, and many of us were exercising our right to vote, so it's the perfect time to talk about how unbelievably queer the women's suffrage movement was. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian who talks about queer history on the internet. The way we tell the history of the women's suffrage movement in the US is incomplete at best and purposefully reimagined at worst. We say that it started at Seneca Falls. We erase the contributions of Black women and other women of color, and we completely ignore the fact that suffragists were inspired to believe that equality was possible at all by the women of the Haudenosaunee, who had had political voice in their sovereign nations for 1,000 years. Plus, leading members of the suffrage movement are often portrayed as chaste, dour women whose spinsterhood was a result of their character flaws rather than a choice. It's reinforced by the fact that the most recognizable name in the women's suffrage movement, Susan B. Anthony, is almost always seen like this, and almost never like this. In reality, the women's suffrage movement was made up of a vibrant collection of people who represented a range of sexualities and gender identities that they expressed in ways both overt and subversive. Susan B. Anthony, for example, was likely a lesbian. She sent Anna Dickinson flirtatious notes about how much she wanted to snuggle and telling her that her bed was big enough for the both of them. And she referred to a companion named Emily Gross as a lover in letters. But Anthony knew that revealing herself as a woman who loved women would be detrimental to the suffrage movement. So she crafted a public persona as a woman who just couldn't find the right man. Gail Laughlin, whose work for the United States Industrial Commission inspired her to join the suffrage movement, is perpetually straight-washed, even by her own niece in the 1979 biography that she wrote about her aunt. But Laughlin was a lesbian and deeply in love with Dr. Mary Austin Sperry, whom she met when they were both working on the California campaign for the vote in 1903. They were together for 16 years, and when Sperry died suddenly during the Spanish flu pandemic, Laughlin kept her ashes with her until her own death in 1952. Their cremains are interred together, and both of their names are on the same marker. Alice Dunbar Nelson worked as a field organizer, touring New Jersey and Pennsylvania to rally support for a woman's right to vote. She cultivated a public persona of what Wendy Rouse calls respectable heterosexuality, as Mrs. Paul Lawrence Dunbar, widow of the famous poet. In her diaries, however, she wrote extensively about her romantic and sexual relationships with both men and women, as well as about the thriving lesbian and bisexual subculture among Black suffragists and club women. The original gal pals, Leona Hunsinger and Elizabeth Hopkinson, were lace makers who met at a lace factory in Philadelphia. They quit their jobs, pooled their savings, and set out to see the world. Eventually, they accepted jobs doing fieldwork for the women's suffrage campaign and spent 6 months touring the Northeast, camping in their car and giving rousing speeches from the backseat of it. Once the campaign was over, the two settled down together on a farm in Pennsylvania and lived out the rest of their lives there. Annie Rensselaer Tinker was a genderqueer suffragist who favored men's fashion and formed a private cavalry to ride in suffrage marches and protect the marchers. Here she is riding in a parade in 1913. Her family seems to have both respected her identity and been perplexed by it, because the epitaph on her grave reads, "Rarely such courage in a man, never in a woman." I guess that's what passes for gender affirmation in 1924. These few stories are just the tip of the iceberg. For a deeper dive, I recommend this book, Public Faces, Secret Lives. It's all about the queer history of the suffrage movement, and it's great. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.